Hello and welcome to the Mossad Files. I'm Dan RAVIV. In our weekly podcast, we take a look at Israel and the Middle East, strategic issues and security, inspired perhaps by the Mossad being Israel's famous intelligence agency, but we talk about a lot more, especially with all the current events since the war in the Middle East. And by that, I mean the Gaza war began after the Hamas attack on Israel of October 7th, 2023. Anyone who's watched us before is familiar with all that and also may be familiar with the face of the man who now joins me on the screen, and that is Michael Oren, a former Israeli ambassador in the United States. He is American born, as am I, only an Israeli citizen now, I believe, and also went on to politics for a while, a member of the Knesset in Israel, a deputy minister, very familiar with Benjamin Netanyahu, if only because you, Michael, worked in a Netanyahu government. And as a historian, I know you lecture a lot and write a lot. What are the two book titles that you think people these days really probably should take a look at again and one would hope buy? What books?
Well, my books, Dan, first of all, it's great to be with you. An honor, a pleasure as always. My books, I would say The 6 Days of War, and Power, Faith, and Fantasy, the book I published about almost 20 years ago.
Power, Faith, and Fantasy. And I think I interviewed you on my CBS News radio show because it was, to me, a look at U.S.-Israel relations, one of my favorite subjects. But it's more than just that.
Oh, it's much bigger than that. It's about America in the Middle East from 1776. It's George Washington's Middle East policy and John Adams and Abraham Lincoln's Middle East policy. And it's a thick book, alas. But it's an important book to understand where America's been in the Middle East and where America might or might not be going in the Middle East.
Like that. I feel even as a reporter in Washington, sometimes I would notice that you on your staff would have an Israeli who might fall in love with an American, and the American might work in your embassy. I think we're used to that kind of couple. Yaron and Sarah were obviously great people, and you've seen that before.
I have, and it was very common. A lot of people got married in my staff. Women. What can I say? First of all, it's not just a tragedy; it's a horrific crime. And you're absolutely right, Dan. This crime did not come out of nowhere. It was the atmosphere of extreme anti-Israel and anti-Semitic state sentiment through large segments of American society, certainly on some of the elite campuses. And it's not just anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism; it's violent anti-Semitism. People call for to internationalize the Intifada. What was the Intifada? It was the suicide bombing death of 1,000 Israelis. Palestine free from the river to sea. It's the elimination state of Israel. People chanting Hamas, Hamas. This is about killing Jews. So that atmosphere is, and you cannot disassociate the assassination, the brutal murder of these two young people from the general atmosphere of hatred toward Israel, toward Jews, that is escalating on throughout in many sectors of America. You just look at all the statistics. Just last year alone, anti-Semitic incidents went up roughly 600%. Well, there's two principles that have always sort of been central to the U.S.-Israel relationship. One is there's no daylight. The other is no surprises. In the past, when the United States, American leaders would issue a statement that would somehow impact Israel's security, Israeli officials were given a chance to look at that statement in advance before it went public. That was the case in 2002 when President Bush issued his roadmap. You remember it, Dan. Prime Minister Ariel Sharon got a look at that roadmap 2 weeks before George Bush published it. That principle was pretty much discarded during the years. You remember that President Obama went to Cairo in 2009 and gave a very long speech that changed American policy. We had no warning about that. In fact, we had no warning about any policy speech made by President Obama over the next 8 years. President Biden was very good about it. We had no surprises. Not that all of his policies were warmly welcomed in Israel, certainly after October 7th, but it didn't surprise us at all. And daylight, but daylight is a different problem. Daylight, that principle is predicated on the belief that if the United States and Israel are perceived outwardly to be distant, to not be marching to the same tune on the same page, then our common enemies will understand that there's a division between us and that they can insinuate themselves between us to the not to the benefit of either party, put it that way. And certainly during the Obama years, that principle also did not hold. During the Biden period, certainly after the October 7th war, there was daylight on issues like Rafah, on Lebanon, on Palestinian casualties in Gaza. But now we have President Trump. Now, President Trump, yes, has his previous term in office amassed probably the most pro-Israel record of any president in history. We're talking about recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, the Abraham Accords, for example. What else? Pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, cutting off funding to UNRWA. It goes on and on and on.
Yeah, persuading key Arab and Muslim countries. And he's so proud of that, of course. And so, again, that's from his first term. So now he's president again at a very complex time that Israel was attacked in such a destructive way on October 7th, 2023. Trump likes to point out that he wasn't president at the time, claims that it wouldn't have happened if he were. Whatever, one cannot rewrite history. And so he becomes history. So he becomes president again and claims that he's going to end this conflict. And we believe it's probably going to be more or less in a way that Israelis would like. I think that's what we thought when he came into office about 4 months ago.
Okay, so there we have some surprises, a lot of surprises, beginning with the announcement in the presence of Prime Minister Netanyahu in the Oval Office that the United States was going to open talks with Iran on the nuclear issue. Keep in mind that Biden himself did not have direct talks with the Iranians; he had indirect talks with the Iranians. So that was a big surprise. Another surprise: the United States making an agreement for a ceasefire with the Houthis without informing Israel at a time when the Houthis were still firing missiles at Israel. As a matter of fact, that announcement came 2 days after a missile hit near our airport and closed down the airport, and almost struck an airplane. So that was a big surprise. That the United States was going to lift sanctions on Syria at a time when the Syrian regime is fighting the Druze population in Syria, and Israel is backing the Druze in Syria. So that was another surprise. There was a surprise about America unilaterally seeking and securing the release of American-Israeli hostage Idan Alexander after more than 560 days of captivity in Gaza. It was certainly welcomed and even celebrated here, but it was a surprise. And then President Trump going to the Middle East on his first foreign excursion and skipping over Israel and going directly to the Gulf. So surprises. Now, my own feeling about this is not done in an attempt to distance the United States from Israel. It's not it's not Obama redux. It's just the way this president operates. He surprises everybody. Just ask Mr. Zelensky how he surprises everybody. Ask the heads of the NATO countries. Ask the G7. Ask anybody. He's full of surprises. He's full of surprises domestically as well, as you know, Dan. So this is his modus operandi, and Israel's going to just have to learn to deal with it and develop contingency plans so that we won't keep on being surprised. And also we have to ask ourselves what we can live with, what we can't live with. And it's perfectly reasonable for the President of the United States to go off and get $1 trillion investment in the U.S. economy. Not a bad idea. Not a bad idea to sell $143 billion worth of arms to the Saudis. It's a shot in the arm for the American arms industry. Very good. And we can't gainsay that. However, I personally believe that the decision not to visit Israel was not beneficial either to the United States or to Israel, especially since the United States the president wants to broker a peace agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And the Saudis will make peace with us not because we're perceived as weak or alienated from the United States, but because we're close to the United States and we're perceived as strong.
It's not clear what Donald Trump's vision for ending the Gaza war is, or for liberating the hostages. He'd like to do all of the above. We know, no secret, that he'd like to win a Nobel Peace Prize, which Obama did, and Trump would like to do that. So that's sort of image. I guess what you would say to your fellow Israelis is, you have to weigh what you can live with. You can't give in to the U.S. on everything.
Precisely. But I'm going to say something that's going to surprise you. I think America's position is clearer than Israel's right now. I think clearly, I agree with you entirely. The president wants a Nobel Peace Prize. He wants to broker that peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Can't do it. Saudis won't sit with us as long as we're fighting. And there are going to be other obstacles along the way. Israel's going to have to do something, even symbolically, about the pathway to a Palestinian statehood, right? But we're not there yet. But I think that President Trump wants to end the war with a prolonged ceasefire. He wants to get as many hostages out. He wants to demilitarize the Gaza Strip. He wants to perhaps exile Hamas's leadership to some horrific place like Algeria or Turkey, or I'm from New Jersey. I can think of a couple of towns we could send them there. My old town, tough one. But our position remains very unclear to me, and I must be very honest with you. We are building up massively our troops in Gaza tonight. One of the largest reservist call-ups in Israel's military history is going on right now as we're speaking. What's the goal? The prime minister sometimes says it's total victory, destroying Hamas, whatever that means. Sometimes he says that it's designed to ratchet up pressure on Hamas so that they will relinquish hostages. And then most recently, in the last couple of days, Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that the goal is to realize President Trump's vision of removing the civilian population from Gaza and rebuilding the Strip as a major tourist destination. So it is unclear. Now, this is domestically is a great challenge because these young people have been fighting for hundreds of days, and they are being asked once again to leave their families, leave their jobs, to fight in truly circumstances, and they have to know for what. But the President of the United States has to know for what also. And I'm sure right now he's scratching his head. You want to give you support? How about giving me a clear idea of what you're doing?
Well, how widespread is the belief in Israel that Netanyahu is keeping the war going, mostly for his own interest, to stay in office, slow down his trial? We've been speaking about it even on this podcast for many, many weeks.
Yes,
does almost everyone accept that? Because that would be very harmful to the morale of the troops.
It is very hard. But listen, right now, according to the most recent poll, yes, a great number of Israelis do believe that Netanyahu is doing this for political reasons. A significant majority of Israelis, upwards of 70% of Israelis, want a ceasefire with the release of hostages. They almost don't care what the price is, as long as the hostages are redeemed. I know Mr. Netanyahu, as you mentioned earlier. I worked with him for a decade. And I don't think that the regnant reason why he's doing this. I'll give you a scenario. Remember I said a little bit of prophecy here, and that Donald Trump begins to say, okay, you got 2 weeks to get this thing over with. And that's going to cause a coalition crisis. But Netanyahu is thinking ahead, well, if I can somehow reach some type of equitable, a sustainable end to the war in Gaza, I can get peace with Saudi Arabia. I can be on that White House lawn and signing up the Crown Prince, and that will open up the Sunni world to Israel's economy. It could be peace with Indonesia, maybe Malaysia, even Pakistan. Trillions of dollars coming in. A railway line that goes from Haifa all the way across to the Persian Gulf to the borders of India. Think about this, and people will forget about Gaza very quickly. This is what he's thinking, and he could do very well in the next election, Stan. He's going to be a player still if his health holds up.
Now, you did say it might be triggered by President Trump giving a deadline. There is something about Trump with his unpredictability. He can trigger things, right? Remember, even that thought, as you said, that Gaza could be a resort paradise. That kind of got the Arabs moving to thinking how they could rebuild Gaza, right? I mean, Trump,
Certainly,
again,
yeah.
Unpredictable, but useful. And either way, we have to live with him. He's the president.
And I also proceed on the assumption that he hasn't exactly succeeded in foreign policy yet. I don't think that Putin is taking him very seriously. And he's looking for where he can get a win.
One other thing you've written about recently, I think you were renewing a call that you made years ago, that Israel should wean itself off American aid. Now, U.S. government aid has been only military, not economic. The average Israeli has a good standard of living, but the military aid has been huge. It's totaled $150 billion, you wrote, and I thought that's pretty much since the Camp David Accords sponsored by Jimmy Carter in 1978 between Israel and Egypt. And so the big money came. It has to be spent in the U.S., as you pointed out, so not bad for the U.S. and its defense industry. But for Israel, are you serious? Israel should say no thanks if there's a renewed offer of almost $4 billion a year?
So this goes back. In 2016, I was the only member of the government to oppose the renewal of the American aid package, what was known as the Memorandum of Understanding $40 billion 10-year package from President Obama. I was against it. And I'm against it today. And it's interesting. Back then, I was kind of a lone voice. People thought I was crazy. And now you had Prime Minister Netanyahu this week saying we have to wean ourselves of American aid. And what are the reasons for this? First of all, back in 2016, I was thinking about the war of 2014, where President Obama held up arms supplies war with the claim that we were killing too many Palestinians. Sound familiar? And I thought we should not be dependent in that way. Certainly for certain essential types of ammunition, artillery and tank ammunition, we had to produce our own. But there are also other reasons. I think that we are, as you mentioned, an affluent country. We should be able to stand on our own 2 feet. We shouldn't be a recipient country of aid. It sends the wrong message to our neighbors. It sends the wrong message to the world. We're a sovereign, strong country. And it also opens us up to how many of our critics in the United States saying we can criticize Israel because we give you money. It goes on and on and on.
By the way, even
killing Palestinians.
Right. But by the way, Michael, even some of those protesters on campus, the ones who were a little more well-informed, when asked, why are you picking on Israel? There's so many wars and oppressive situations around the world. And the smarter ones say, because the U.S. is financing it. So you'd like to take away that excuse.
And look at this. It's $4 billion a year, which today doesn't buy you all that much. It buys you one half of one Zimwalt class destroyer. There was a time when that aid was 50% of our defense budget. Now it's much, much less. So you got to think about the opportunity costs. It's not just that we can't buy what we want to buy. We can't sell to whom we want to sell. So there are many reasons why this is not a healthy relationship. I want to move it to a healthy relationship, which is a partnership, not a one of handout and recipient, but one of equal partners in areas where of mutual benefit. It would be in cyber, in AI, in laser, in intelligence services, in crypto defense, certainly cyber defense. Israel has a tremendous amount to contribute to America's security, and that's the kind of relationship we want.
Wow. As small as Israel is, you think it could portray itself as a partner. And to be frank, the contracts and worldwide sales of Israeli defense products would make up pretty well for the money. And then you especially like the political freedom and the image.
Sure. And so I think, again, not the profit. I think this is going to happen. I think we're going to move toward that. I think we're already producing our own much of our own ammunition, and we have to do that. We've learned that lesson, and I think it's healthy. I think it's healthy for both of our countries.
All right. Now I don't know if it's a dream right now because Israel created the Iron Dome, a fantastic anti-rocket missile and mortar system. It can hit drones as well. Israel created it, but at times of crisis, it was a company in the USA that had to make the interceptor missiles and send them over to Israel. So there'd be plenty. So much to talk about. We'll leave it at that for now. I'm sure there'll be more in the future. Michael Oren, of course, the audience knows, is a former Israeli ambassador in Washington. What a communicator. He's been seen in so many different media, and well, a great teacher too, well loved at many universities, and a historian, as you heard. I mean, to me, one of the most famous titles is 6 Days of War, explaining background of the 6-Day War of 1967. And again, I never want to get that title wrong. The book about the U.S. history in the Middle East. Get that title right, please. Help me.
Power, Faith, and Fantasy.
Power,
America
Faith,
in the Middle East from 1776 to the present.
I'll bet you among all those books behind Ambassador Oren, there's at least one behind him. Michael Oren, thanks very much for joining us here on the Mossad.
Thank you, Dan. Always a pleasure and an honor.